Liza. Yes, Henry? There's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza, a hole. Then fix it, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. Then fix it, dear Henry, dear Henry, fix it. With what shall I fix it, dear Eliza, dear Eliza? With what shall I fix it, dear Eliza? With what? With straw, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. With straw, dear Henry, dear Henry, with straw. The straw is too long, dear Eliza, dear Eliza. The straw is too long, dear Eliza, too long. Then cut it, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. Then cut it, dear Henry, dear Henry, cut it. What shall I cut it, dear Eliza, dear Eliza? With what shall I cut it, dear Eliza? With what? With a knife, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. With a knife, dear Henry, dear Henry, a knife. The knife is too dull, dear Eliza, dear Eliza. The knife is too dull, dear Eliza, too dull. Then sharpen it, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. Then sharpen it, dear Henry, dear Henry, sharpen it. On what shall I sharpen it, dear Eliza, dear Eliza? On what shall I sharpen it, dear Eliza? On what? With a stone, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. With a stone, dear Henry, dear Henry, a stone. The stone is too dry, dear Eliza, dear Eliza. The stone is too dry, dear Eliza, too dry. Then wet it, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. Then wet it, dear Henry, dear Henry, wet it. With what shall I wet it, dear Eliza, dear Eliza? With what shall I wet it, dear Eliza? With what? With water, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. With water, dear Henry, dear Henry, water. In what shall I fetch it, dear Eliza, dear Eliza? In what shall I fetch it, dear Eliza? In what? In a bucket, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. In a bucket, dear Henry, dear Henry, a bucket. But there's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza, dear Liza. There's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza, a hole. Well, fuck you, dear Henry, dear Henry, dear Henry. Fuck you, dear Henry, dear Henry, fuck you.